And now we move on to the factors at play when it comes to this issue. So there are three different factors, actually four in the next slide. So there are the laws, the police force, and the Filipino people. And so the laws and executive orders were put in place to shield the government and consolidate power under Duterte. And so that relates to the police force, which is another player in this issue, which is protected by the government. So it fails to recognize human rights and directly carries out violence without major blowback because of its protection both by the laws recently implemented as well as the continuous defense by the president. And we also have the Philippine people, who are also important stakeholders in this issue. According to a survey conducted by Social Weather Station in June 2019, 82% indicated a high approval of the drug war. And so because of this, this allows Duterte and his government to essentially continue with relative impunity. And obviously another major player in this issue are the advocacy groups. So what is being done to stop this issue? So I've brought up four of them, all active groups that are fighting for human rights in the Philippines. We are obviously acquainted with the Human Rights Watch, who has a hand in many human rights issues. We also have Rappler, which is a social news network that also closely works with the Human Rights Watch in order to report news directly from the Philippines. And there are two other advocacy groups that are actually on the ground in the Philippines. So that's PAHRA, which is the Philippine Alliance of Human Rights Advocates, and I Defend, which is in defense of human rights and a dignity movement. So both of these advocacy groups actually work together and hold protests around the Philippines, primarily in Manila, which is the Philippines capital. And they protest against Duterte's war on drugs. They also cover other issues such as the HIV outbreak and advocate for women's rights. However, these groups have been met with a lot of resistance from the government as they are seen as enemies of Duterte. But they are still working towards having human rights for Philippine citizens. And so for section 4, the solution, it's my project. So for my project, I decided to write a letter to the US ambassador to the United Nations, which is Kelly Craft. I decided to write a letter because its mode of communication seemed direct and it allowed for a more concise summation of ideas and concerns. And so I formatted my letter into 3 different sections. So first, I identified the problem. I introduced the problem and my relation to it as a Filipino American, in which I am concerned for my family and others who still reside in the Philippines. And then I proceeded to provide evidence in which I stated laws enacted by the government, such as consolidating power under Duterte, increasing military presence domestically, and also stripping citizens of their autonomy. And so I continued to close my letter by proposing a solution, which encouraged Kelly Craft to take action. Some of the solutions I outlined regarded restructuring the current allyship between the US and the Philippines, continuing efforts made by the UN's Human Rights Council to formally conduct an investigation into these killings, because advocacy groups can't or don't have the power to do that on themselves. So the UN, being a body of action, would also help in investigating the actions of Duterte. And I also outlined considering the Magnitsky Act to be extended to the Philippines, which the act would essentially freeze any assets in the US owned by the Philippines. So that would go back to reconsidering the allyship. And so here are some examples from my letter that reflect the structure I put it in. So the first one relates to the introduction of the issue. So I say that Pursuant to that end, the ICC, which is the International Criminal Court, has launched a preliminary investigation into the recent war on drugs in the Philippines, spearheaded by President Rodrigo Duterte since taking office in June 2016. Duterte has long stated his support for the murder of people suspected of drug use or dealing. On June 4th, 2016, he stated that if you're still into drugs, I will kill you. Don't take this as a joke. I'm not trying to make you laugh. I'll really kill you. Since his assumption of the presidency, the Philippine National Police reported 5,526 suspects have died. However, the Human Rights Watch organization estimates up to 27,000 deaths have occurred as of January 2020 due to the lack of investigation into murders by unidentified gunmen. And so the next one talks about the evidence regarding the issue. This is mostly about laws. So I said that furthermore, the Philippine government has instituted laws that prevent opposition to the drug war and shield those who are committing human rights violations. These laws include Memorandum Order Number 32, which implements immediate reinforcement of military and police forces into Samar, Negros, and Bicol regions to deter lawlessness and violence. Executive Order Number 70, which establishes a task force with the power to remove opposition groups, particularly at the local level. And DILG Memorandum Order Number 2019/116, it requires local governments to report the presence and activities of non-governmental organizations. And the last one talks about my solution to the problem. And so I encourage the United States to denounce this campaign of violence that has impacted many citizens in the Philippines and revoke support for Duterte's government. Despite the US's allyship with the Philippines, the government continues to commit heinous crimes against its own people. The United Nations should take decisive action towards punishing Duterte and relevant authorities involved in sweeping human rights violations in the Philippines. Also consider supporting existing NGOs and advocacy groups that are currently working in the Philippines. And then there are some examples of advocacy groups. And I'll also provide a link to my full letter to Kelly Craft in Road class if any of you would like to view the full letter. And here are my sources, and that's it. Thanks for listening.